The Horus heresy killed billions. It shattered the Imperium, broke legions, and turned brother against brother in a war that the galaxy never recovered from. Most people blame Horus, but Horus was a weapon. Somebody else pulled the trigger, and that somebody was a word bearer with scripture carved into his skull. Let's start with the most hated man in the entire setting, Erebus. Before a single bolter was fired in the Horus heresy, before Horus ever turned his back on the Emperor, there was a chaplain whispering in the dark. And that's exactly what makes Erebus so deeply, fundamentally wrong. He's not the strongest character in Warhammer 40k. He's not the most powerful psyker. He's not even close to the most dangerous fighter, but he might be the single most destructive mortal who ever lived. Erebus was the first chaplain of the Word Bearers. That title alone should tell you something, because the Word Bearers were a legion built entirely on faith. They worshipped the Emperor as a god. They spread his word like missionaries. And Erebus was the man standing at the pulpit. Here's where it gets dark. He tattooed sections of the Book of Lorgar directly onto his own scalp. Not his arm, not his chest, his scalp. That's the kind of devotion that doesn't come from belief. That comes from obsession. And it was all in service of one goal, becoming the instrument of chaos itself. He called himself Destiny's Hand, the mortal instrument of the ruinous powers. Not a warrior, not a conqueror. A hand, a tool. And that framing is deliberate because Erebus never needed to swing the sword. He just needed to make sure the right people picked theirs up. Working alongside Corfarin, he corrupted Lorgar, his own Primarch, turning the most faithful son of the Emperor into the first traitor. But he didn't stop there. He then played a direct role in turning Horus himself, one chaplain, two of the most pivotal corruptions in the history of the Imperium, billions of deaths across thousands of worlds, and it traces back to one man who weaponized the two things Space Marines are built on, faith and brotherhood. And during the Siege of Terra, when the traitor legions were tearing the Imperial Palace apart, Erebus was aboard the vengeful spirit, not fighting, not leading charges, just present, because that's what Erebus does. He doesn't need to fight. The damage is already done by the time the fighting starts. That's what makes him uniquely disturbing. Every other villain on this list will horrify you with what they did. Erebus horrifies you with what he convinced everyone else to do. But if you think a manipulator is bad, wait until you meet a Primarch who was literally built to feel nothing but rage. Angron. Before Angron was a Primarch, before he ever led a legion, before the Emperor even knew his name, he was property. A slave on the planet Nunaria, thrown into gladiatorial pits as a child and forced to kill for the entertainment of crowds. He didn't choose violence. Violence was chosen for him. Every single day of his early life was defined by chains, blood, and the roar of spectators watching children murder each other for sport. And that alone would be enough to break someone. But the slave masters of Nuceria wanted more than broken. They wanted controllable. So they implanted him with the butcher's nails. Here's where Angron stops being a tragic backstory and becomes something genuinely horrifying. The butcher's nails are surgical implants hammered directly into the brain. They don't just make you aggressive. They make peace neurologically impossible. The implants suppress serotonin production and flood the system with adrenaline, meaning Angron's baseline emotional state is a permanent fight or flight crisis. Every waking second, he cannot feel calm, he cannot feel joy, he cannot feel anything except rage or agony. Those are his only two settings. Let that sink in. This isn't a character who chose to be angry. This is a character whose brain was physically rewired so that the only relief from constant screaming pain is more violence. The moment he stops fighting, the pain comes back. The moment he rests, the nails punish him. There is no off switch. But here's the kicker. He didn't keep that suffering to himself. Angron passed versions of the butcher's nails to his entire legion, the World Eaters. Thousands of Space Marines, warriors who were already among the deadliest beings in the galaxy, were subjected to the same neurological torture that had been destroying Angron since childhood. He condemned his own sons to the same existence he was trapped in. Whether that was cruelty or a desperate attempt to make them understand what he lived with every day is still debated. Either answer is devastating. Eventually, Angron fell to chaos and became a demon prince of Khorne, the god of war and bloodshed. And the disturbing part, it wasn't a reward, it was closer to a mercy. Demonhood was literally the only thing powerful enough to absorb the pain the nails were causing. The god of slaughter looked at Angron and essentially said, I can use this. And the results speak for themselves. Angron defeated Robot Guilliman in direct combat. Guilliman, one of the most tactically brilliant and physically capable Primarchs in the entire setting, and Angron broke him. Because that's what happens when you build a being entirely around pain and violence. You don't get a warrior, you get a catastrophe with a heartbeat. The most disturbing thing about Angron isn't that he's a monster. It's that every single person who touched his life made him into one. And by the time anyone thought to ask whether he could be saved, the answer was already no. But at least Angron's suffering was inflicted by slavers and surgeons. The next Primarch on this list had his soul rotted out by something far worse than Sandy Blade, Fabius Bile. Most of the characters characters on this list are disturbing because they serve something: a god, a vision, a grudge. Fabius Bile serves nothing but his own curiosity, and that's exactly what makes him one of the most unsettling figures in the entire setting. Bile calls himself the primogenitor, and before you think that's some ancient title passed down through dark ritual, no, he gave it to himself. He just decided one day that he was the father of a new generation of post-human life, and then he got to work proving it. Here's what that work actually looks like. Fabius Bile's entire project is the unsanctioned recreation and improvement of the space marine creation process. We're talking about one of the most sacred, most dangerous biological procedures in the Imperium, something that kills a significant percentage of candidates even when it's done correctly. And Bile is running his own bootleg version of it in hidden laboratories scattered across the galaxy, on unwilling subjects, with zero oversight, for fun. But the cloning is where it gets truly unhinged. Bile claims to have successfully cloned all 20 Primarchs, every single one. The demigods that the Emperor himself created using methods that nobody fully understands. Bale looked at that and said, I can do that in a lab. And the terrifying part, the evidence suggests he wasn't lying. He's produced matured clones of Ferrus Manus, Fulgrim, and Horus, among others. He also allegedly stockpiled enough gene seed to produce nearly 18,000 legionaries. To put that in perspective, that's enough raw biological material to rebuild an entire Space Marine Legion from scratch. In a basement, run by one guy who answers to nobody, and here's where it gets genuinely creepy. Bile has died multiple times, and it didn't matter. After his apparent deaths, Bile allegedly continued to exist as a Gestalt intelligence distributed across roughly a dozen autonomous clones of himself. Every single one of them is Fabius Bile. Every single one thinks it's the real one. The him you're talking to at any given moment might not even be the original. He's not a person anymore. He's a concept wearing lab coats. What makes Bile uniquely horrifying compared to every other major Chaos figure is that he refuses to pledge allegiance to any Chaos god. He's not doing this for Nurgle. He's not scheming for Tzeentch. He's not chasing Slaaneshi excess. He's doing it for science. Pure, cold, detached scientific curiosity with absolutely zero moral framework attached to it. No ideology, no cause, no loyalty, just an endless appetite for the next experiment and a complete indifference to the screaming. His laboratories have been described as flesh refineries, and that term earns itself. Forced genetic alteration of humans, harvesting and splicing Astartes gene seed, the production of grotesque hybrid organisms that shouldn't exist, the administration of experimental serums to entire civilian populations just to see what would happen. He didn't see people as people. He saw raw material. Every other villain on this list has a reason you can point to. Trauma, corruption, divine madness. Bile has a clipboard and a hypothesis. And somehow, that's worse. But if clinical horror made your skin crawl, wait until you meet the walking plague ship who makes Mortarian's diseases look like a mild cold. Typhus. Most characters on this list chose their fate. Typhus didn't choose anything. Something chose him, crawled inside, and never left. Born Callus Typhon on Barbarous, the same death world that produced Mortarian, Typhus grew up breathing poison. Literally. Barbarous was a planet defined by toxic atmosphere, feudal overlords, and the basic principle that if you weren't killing something, something was killing you. His father was one of those overlords. His mother was human. So from birth, he existed between two worlds that both wanted him dead. But the atmosphere wasn't the worst part. From childhood, psychic phenomena followed his emotions. Every outburst, every nightmare, every flash of anger came with something extra, something that shouldn't have been there. By the time he reached adulthood, he had mastered psychic energies that emerged nightly. Let me be clear about what that means in the 40k universe. Psychic ability isn't a gift, it's a beacon. It's a dinner bell ringing in the warp, telling every demon within screaming distance that fresh meat is available. And Typhus rang that bell every single night for years. Here's where it gets genuinely horrifying. The demon Grulgor didn't possess Typhus. Possession implies two separate things, one controlling the other. What happened to Typhus was worse. Grulgor dissolved into him. The demon merged with his body at a biological level, fusing human flesh, demonic matter, and power armor into a single organism. He didn't make a deal with the demon. He didn't invite one in. The two entities became one thing, and whatever walked out the other side of that process wasn't Callus Typhon anymore. It wasn't Grulgor either. It was something new, something that shouldn't exist. And that something went to work. As Herald of Nurgle, Typhus commands plague fleets that don't just attack worlds, they convert them. His signature contagions don't kill populations, they zombify them. Entire star systems have been hit with plagues that turn the living into shambling vectors for further infection. The worlds he touches don't go quiet. They keep moving, they keep spreading. Every corpse becomes a delivery system for the next outbreak, which means every victory Typhus wins keeps winning long after he's gone. Then there's his body. His physical form is described as pustulant armor fused permanently to flesh. That's not a metaphor. The distinction between Typhus's body and his equipment no longer exists. He can't remove the armor. It's him now. Where the ceramite ends and the rotting meat begins is a question that no longer has an answer. Every breath, every step, every movement is the sound of something wet, shifting inside, something that used to be solid. Typhus is body horror made into a military strategy. He's the point where disease stops being something that happens to you and starts being something that uses you. But if Typhus is the infection, his gene father Mortarion is the pandemic. And that story is somehow worse. Mortarion. Here's what makes Mortarion different from every other traitor Primarch. He didn't fall because he was weak. He didn't fall because he was tricked. He fell because he made a choice, and that choice was to save the people he loved. Let me explain. During the Horus Heresy, the Death Guard were hit with something called the Destroyer Plague. This wasn't a normal sickness. This was a Nurgle-crafted contagion designed to break Space Marines, warriors engineered to be immune to virtually every disease in existence. And it was working. Mortarion's sons, his entire legion, were dying slowly and in agony. There was no cure. There was no escape. So Mortarion did what any desperate father would do. He made a deal with the god of plague itself. He pledged his soul and his legion to Nurgle, and Nurgle accepted. The Death Guard were remade, their bodies bloated, split open, rotted from the inside out, organs liquefied and reformed into something new, flesh fused with armor. They became plague marines, walking corpses that never quite finished dying, because that's Nurgle's gift. Decay without death, rot without release. Every single legionary was transformed into a biological weapon that could never be put down, because the disease keeping them alive was also the thing destroying them. And it would never stop, but here's where it gets worse. Mortarion didn't just accept his new reality, he leaned into it, hard. Using something called the Hand of Darkness, Mortarion personally engineered 7 new diseases. Not battlefield plagues, not tactical bioweapons. These were world-ending contagions designed to devastate entire regions of space. One of them, a blindness-inducing plague, swept across Ultramar. That's not a single planet. That's an entire stellar empire. One of the most important and prosperous regions in the entire Imperium. The plague was so devastating that Reboot Guilliman himself had to return from the dead and personally find a cure. That's the scale we're talking about. Mortarion didn't just attack a world, he blinded a civilization. And the plague wars that followed were exactly as horrifying as they sound. Whole worlds consumed by disease, populations rotting alive. Guilliman's own domain, the crown jewel of imperial governance, brought to its knees by a brother who decided that if he had to suffer, everyone would suffer with him. But Mortarion's legacy goes even further back than that. During the Siege of Terra, the single most important battle in Imperial history, the Death Guard were the first traitor force to make landfall. The opening 8 of humanity's darkest hour was a wave of plague-ridden monsters crashing into the Emperor's doorstep. That was Mortarion's doing, and his story doesn't end with defeat. It doesn't end with redemption. Mortarion now rules an entire plague world within Nurgle's domain as a demon prince. He sits on a throne of rot, fully committed to the path he chose 10,000 years ago. He successfully converted his entire legion into unkillable biological weapons. He devastated one of the Imperium's most critical regions, and he did all of it knowingly. That's the thing about Mortarion that makes him so deeply unsettling. Typhus spread plague because he was consumed by it. Mortarion spread plague because he engineered it. Every disease was calculated. Every outbreak was intentional. This wasn't madness. This was leadership pointed in the worst possible direction, and he never once looked back. But a planetary-scale biological warfare feels like the ceiling for how disturbing one person can get. Wait until you meet the man who decided the real frontier of horror was a laboratory. Konrad Kurz. Imagine growing up on the worst planet in the galaxy. Not the most dangerous, not the most war-torn, but the most hopeless. Nostromo was a world where crime wasn't a problem to be solved. It was the economy. Poverty was so extreme that suicide literally functioned as population control. That's the baseline. That's normal on Nostromo. Now drop a child into that world with no parents, no guidance, and no one to explain what's right and what's wrong. Just a kid alone in the dark, learning the rules of a society that had none. Konrad Kurz didn't become a monster overnight. He became one methodically. Here's what separates Kurz from every other disturbing figure we've talked about so far. Angron was broken by implants. Mortarion was twisted by plague. Typhus was consumed by a demon. But Kurz was shaped entirely by environment. No surgical explanation, no warp corruption. Just a child who looked at the world around him and decided the only language Nostromo understood was terror. And he was right. His rise to power didn't come through politics or alliances. It came through nocturnal hunts. He would track criminals through the streets at night, let them know they were being followed, let the fear build, and then kill them. But killing wasn't the point. The mutilation was the point. Every corpse was a message. Every severed limb was a public service announcement. Before you dismiss this as just another violent origin story, hear me out. The truly disturbing part isn't that Kurz was brutal. It's that it worked. crime on Nostromo collapsed. Surrounding cities submitted to his rule, not because he conquered them, but because they were terrified of what would happen if they didn't. His system of governance through terror produced results. Order was restored. People were safer. And that's the kind of moral horror that Warhammer 40k does better than almost any other setting in fiction. Because now you're sitting with an uncomfortable question. If the methods are monstrous, but the outcome is stability, does that make the methods justified? Kurz thought so. And the lore never gives you an easy answer. Every kill was calculated. Every display of brutality served a strategic purpose. A lunatic who kills without reason is terrifying. A genius who kills with perfect reason might be worse. And then the Emperor found him and gave him a legion. Think about that. One traumatized child's survival strategy became the official operating doctrine of an entire Space Marine legion. The Night Lords adopted his methods wholesale. The nocturnal hunts, the psychological warfare, the mutilation as messaging. They carried it across the galaxy to hundreds of worlds for centuries. Every world the Night Lords terrorized was Nostromo all over again. Every flayed body hung from a Havelock wall was Kurz's childhood repeating itself on a galactic scale. And the worst part, he knew exactly how it would end. Kurz had visions of his own death. He saw it coming and did nothing to stop it, because in his mind, Diane proved his point. If the Emperor's justice was real, someone would have come to stop him. And when an assassin finally did, Kurz let it happen. He sat down and waited. That's not madness. That's conviction. And conviction without conscience is the most dangerous thing in the 40k universe. But if Kurz's horror lives in what one broken mind can justify, the next entry proves that you don't even need to believe in what you're doing. You just need to be willing to burn everything down for power. Belacor. Every character on this list is terrifying for what they've done. Belacor is terrifying for how long he's been doing it. He is the first, not the first demon prince of Khorne or Nurgle or Tzeentch. The first demon prince, period. The first mortal in the entire history of the setting to be elevated to demonhood. Every single demon prince that came after him, every bargain struck with chaos that ended in transformation, every corrupted champion across 10,000 years of war follows a template that Belacor established. He didn't just walk a path, he carved it, and then he watched as an endless parade of fools stumbled down it after him, thinking they were special. But here's what separates Belacor from every other demon in the setting. Most demon princes serve a god. They're tools, weapons with personalities. Belacor serves nobody. He has spent his existence conquering and subjugating mortal empires across history. Not for Khorne's bloodlust, not for Nurgle's garden, not for any god's agenda. For his own. And that distinction matters more than you think, because it means his motives remain genuinely opaque even to the chaos gods themselves. In a setting where four entities are supposed to be functionally omniscient within their domains, Belacor operate in the gaps between them. He moves where they can't fully see. He plans where they can't fully predict. That should terrify you. Let me put the timescale into perspective. Belacor was manipulating civilizations before the Imperium of Man existed, before the Emperor unified Terra, before the Great Crusade, before the Horus Heresy. The entire 10,000-year history of the Imperium, everything from the siege of Terra to the fall of Cadia, all of it is just one chapter in whatever Belacor has been building toward. Most civilizations don't last as long as his patience, and he doesn't sit idle. In 999 M41, Belacor was directly involved in an operation to bombard Terra itself, the Imperial throne world, the single most defended location in the galaxy. He wasn't stopped by the Imperial Navy. He wasn't stopped by the Custodies. He was stopped by the Legion of the Damned, a force so mysterious, so poorly understood that their arrival to specifically counter Belacor raises more questions than it answers. What does it say about a being when the universe has to deploy something that might be literal ghosts to keep him in check? And then, after the Great Rift tore the galaxy in half, Belacor pledged his demonic legions to abandon the despoiler, not out of loyalty, not out of shared purpose, presumably because it served whatever long-term calculation he's been running since before human civilization learned to write. His allegiances shift constantly. His agenda never does. That's the thing about Belacor that no other character on this list replicates. Kurz was a monster driven by visions he couldn't escape. Angron was broken by the nails. Erebus is a schemer, but he schemes for the gods. Belacor schemes for Belacor, and he's been doing it for longer than most species in the galaxy have existed. He doesn't rage. He doesn't corrupt for corruption's sake. He watches. He waits. He positions pieces on a board so vast that nobody else can see the edges. The most disturbing thing about the first dam isn't what he's done. It's the quiet, creeping realization that everything he's done so far might just be preparation, that whatever he's actually building toward hasn't happened yet, and that he has the patience to wait another 10,000 years if he needs to. He is the thing in 40k that doesn't blink. But at least Belacor, ancient and unknowable as he is, still thinks. He still plans. He still has something recognizable as a mind. The final entry on this list doesn't have that luxury, and what it lacks in consciousness, it makes up for in the sheer, indifferent scale of what it consumes. Hive Fleet Leviathan. Every character we've talked about in this video has one thing in common. They all have a reason for what they do. Kurz wanted justice through fear. Angron was broken by the nails. Erebus wanted to reshape the galaxy in the image of the dark gods. Even Belacor, ancient as he is, has ambition. He wants power. He wants control. Every single one of them, no matter how twisted, operates with something resembling a motive. Hive Fleet Leviathan has no motive. It has appetite. That's it. And that's what makes it the most disturbing entry on this list. Leviathan entered the galaxy in 997, M41, and it is the largest known Tyranid hive fleet ever recorded. But calling it a fleet is already misleading. It's not ships. It's not an army. It's a single distributed superorganism. One biological mind stretched across interstellar distances, thinking, adapting, and hunting as a unified intelligence. Every tendril, every bioship, every swarm of gaunts pouring across a planet's surface is the same creature. You're not fighting an invasion. You're being digested. And here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. Tyranids don't just consume organic life. They strip worlds of everything. Minerals, fuel, technological components, atmosphere. When Leviathan finishes with a planet, there's nothing left. Not ruins, not bones, not even air. Just a dead rock drifting through space where a civilization used to be. There is no archaeological record, no memorial, no evidence that anyone ever lived there at all. To understand the scale of what Leviathan represents, you have to start with what came before it. Hive Fleet Behemoth was the first major Tyranid incursion, making contact in 741M41. Behemoth devastated the planet Tyrants so completely that the world became a reference point for extinction-level consumption. It took one of the most brutal military engagements in Imperial history, the Battle of Macraig in 745 M41, to stop Behemoth, and that victory cost the Ultramarines their entire first company. Leviathan is larger than Behemoth, significantly larger. Whatever Behemoth did, take that and multiply it across dozens of tendrils attacking from below the galactic plane simultaneously. The Imperium didn't even see it coming from the direction it arrived because nobody was looking down. But the real horror of Leviathan isn't tactical. It's philosophical. There is no negotiation with it. There is no ideology to counter, no leader to assassinate, no throne to topple, no demands to meet. It doesn't hate humanity. It doesn't hate the Imperium. It doesn't know the Imperium exists as anything other than biomass waiting to be processed. Every war the Imperium has ever fought, every crusade, every heresy, every billion casualty conflict over territory and faith and power, Leviathan registers none of it. It's all just food, and that reframes this entire video. Think about everything we've covered. Kurz's centuries of terror, Angron's rage, Mortarian's plagues sweeping across Ultramar, Fabius Bial's laboratories full of screaming genetic abominations, typhus spreading contagion across star systems, Erebus engineering the single greatest betrayal in human history, Belacor manipulating civilizations across millennia. All of that, every atrocity, every scheme, or every empire built or destroyed, is happening inside a galaxy that Leviathan is in the process of eating. Whatever they're fighting over, whatever dark gods they serve, whatever twisted vision of order or chaos they're trying to impose, Leviathan doesn't care. It doesn't even register their existence as meaningful. Kurz is protein. Angron is protein. The Emperor on his golden throne is protein. The difference between a loyalist and a traitor, between a saint and a demon, between a hero and a monster, means absolutely nothing to something that only understands consumption and growth. That's the existential nightmare at the heart of Warhammer 40,000. Every horror in this setting, every disturbing character, every act of cruelty and madness and corruption is ultimately happening on a dinner plate. And the thing holding the fork doesn't even know their names. Leviathan is still out there, it's still hungry, and it's still growing. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.